Bloodstained.
Okay guys, I wanted to take a quick look at Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. I wasn't initially intending to take a look at this at all. I'm not really a Castlevania guy. I've never tried one, but I saw the initial one, Curse of the Moon or something, the first Bloodstained kind of 8-bit, 16-bit looking Metroidvania game, and wanted to take a look at it. I got it on Switch and put it in, played it for about an hour, and wanted to give you my initial thoughts. Because I have no prior experience with the Metroidvania style game, I thought it might be helpful to talk about the things that I expect to see initially. These might be misconceptions, but based on my very limited knowledge of Castlevania and Metroidvania style games, I kind of expect to see one, fluid gameplay, combat, platforming, anything like that should be fluid, should feel good. I expect it to be kind of fast-paced. Secondly, decent looking and interesting enemies. I imagine, since this is a first impressions, that I won't see a lot of the enemy models, a lot of the enemy types in the game. But I imagine that the first part will at least give us a flavor for what types of enemies are involved. Third, I imagine there will be pretty good graphics or very stylized graphics. I'm okay with either as long as it's consistent and makes sense. Fourth, I know that Castlevania in particular is known for its score and soundtrack, so I expect there to be a lot of good music, a lot of good sound effects potentially, that sort of thing. And lastly, I expect there to be some customization. I know in their original Castlevanias, and even in Metroid, if we're considering this a Metroidvania, there were different weapon types, different sub-weapon types. So I'm interested to see how that all plays out and to learn a little bit more about that. So let's dive in. Section 1, Gameplay. So right out of the gate is something I wasn't expecting to contend with, and that is the startup time. So what you have playing in the background right now is the actual startup time with me mashing the A button. Overall, I think it's 41 and a half seconds altogether, which doesn't sound like a lot in theory, but this is the second time I've booted up the game, and this is exactly how long it takes. So kind of disappointed there initially. We get the title screen, and I want to point out that I can't do anything to progress until we see press any button. There's another loading screen directly after this once we go to the main menu and press start new game. I'm not going to include that because I don't think that's fair. On startup of a new game, any game's going to take a while to load. And it does take a while. I didn't time it exactly. Then we're confronted with a storybook intro, storybook style intro. I'm playing on English, as you can hear in the background, but I'm not going to bore you with all the details. It does sound interesting. If you're interested in the story, I suggest you play the game. Spoilers. We don't pick up control of our main character Miriam until she has a quick discussion with Johannes, who's apparently her friend. Then we get to open a chest to gain some new equipment. And we have a minor fight with a small tentacle creature that gives us a soul shard. So what we learn in this section is that there's going to be multiple types of weaponry. There's going to be some magic that we're going to get through these soul shard items. While all that's cool and certainly shows the opportunity for development and growth of the character and her abilities, sadly not everything fares as well. This jumping section, any jumping section really, any platforming section, feels very static. Feels like you stick to things. For instance, when you hit the ground, there's an impact, which is interesting, but it slows everything down. You kind of have to stand in place for a second. You can't just fluidly move on to the next motion. Combat is much the same, with attacks having large startup and cooldown timers, if you want to think of it that way, where once you hit a button, you're locked into it. That's a very fighting game mechanic, so it could be intended. but it didn't feel as fluid as smooth as I wanted it to or expected it to in a action platformer. There were also periods of noticeable slowdown. I don't know if it comes out in my recording, but when playing the game, I certainly felt 2 or 3 times probably in fights with various creatures. I want to again mention that I'm on the Switch, and I'll continue to mention that when I think it's necessary, because I think that this might be a poor port. I'm wondering if the Steam, the PC build or the PS4 build is more fluid, is more refined, and some of the textures you'll even see kind of look bad, but I'll get to that more in graphics section. Also, make no mistake about it, I don't blame the game for my lack of understanding of the game's combat mechanics. At this point, I'm admittedly and very obviously bad.
Then they can help me wake up these muscles of mine. I'll wipe the deck with them.
Sadly, I don't think that's the case with me behind the controller, Miriam. I'm so sorry. Later, after we escape the ship, we meet some new friends and get introduced to our first town. It's kind of just a refuge for a few people. But in the refuge, there's actually a crafting station. So all of the items we're picking up throughout the game are actually going to be able to be used to create things, whether it be healing items, consumable items, weapons, or even armor and accessories. So it's very cool, and this is where I really was interested in trying out all of the weapons. I don't know which one I will like the best, or it seems that sometimes, for instance, with the boss fight at the end of the ship section, it felt like the whip was a much better friend to me than the short sword. That could just be my playstyle, or it could be intended. So something to keep in mind. There's also a shop where we can just simply buy items with the gold we've been collecting. The nun or the priestess or whatever she is actually holds those items for us. Another way to get items beyond picking them up in the dungeons. Very cool, and I think that could lead to some interesting things down the road, especially with how they stated that you can combine shards, magic shards, soul shards, I guess, that give you magic, to create or to enhance your magic that you already have. So if you really like a spell, potentially you can just build out that spell rather than switching back and forth between spells. So cool concept, and hopefully it gets better as the game progresses. Section 2, graphics. Okay, so the graphics section is going to be a little bit shorter and sweeter. Well, maybe not sweeter. The problem is, right when you boot up the game, there's this discussion between Johannes and Miriam. And what we see in that cutscene, I initially thought was a stylization of making it look like there's ink splotches on textures. It's really bad shading is what it looks like shadows are not properly being rendered. In short, some of the textures leave something to be desired. I hope this is only a Switch thing again. Another thing that I noticed is in a couple of cutscenes, primarily the boss at the end of the ship, where there's a moment where Miriam touches the ground, but it looks like she's floating. And that kind of struck me, like her hand isn't touching the ground. I wonder if it's supposed to be touching water or something, because there's a lot of other places where there's splashing, where Miriam moves her feet and there's splashing water on the ground when she's on deck primarily. But there's not a whole lot of water running around, like not standing water at least. There's running water, which wouldn't make a splash. So those two things brought me out of it. I played this all in docked mode. I didn't play it in handheld mode. I would expect to see some lower res textures in portable mode, but docked mode I would expect to see some high quality textures, and I really was kind of disappointed. I don't know if that was a budget limitation. I think this was a Kickstarter initially, and I know that type of thing can happen, but it really brought me out of it, like I say, and left a little something to be desired. And maybe it gets better as the game goes on as well. And again, maybe it's the Switch port, maybe the PS4 looks better, maybe the PC looks better. So if you're looking at it solely from a graphic standpoint, I would say look at some comparison footage, look at some PS4 gameplay, look at some PC gameplay, and see if there's a better result out there than the Switch identifies. Section 3, Sound. I sadly don't have a whole lot to say about sound. The sound effects, the sound design was okay, acceptable, even good at times, but nothing that felt so impactful that it really enhanced the experience overall. I will say that the footfalls, the falling on an object and hitting the floor makes a pretty satisfying sound, but otherwise, like, the weapon sounds aren't particularly amazing. From a music standpoint, what I was really hoping for, it's okay. Again, the ship music got a little repetitive, but I think that's as a result of me just running around kind of exploring the area for an extended period of time. The boss music, as you would hope, was a little bit more hyped up, a little bit more impactful, and that I enjoyed quite a bit more. There's also a violin sting at the end of the ship section when you're transitioning to the new area, and that was interesting. It was kind of unexpected. The music there sounds like it'll be a good change of pace. Again, I only played an hour, so I don't have a whole lot to go off of, but right now I would say that it's good. I imagine that it gets better, especially when you get more variations than the initial song. Hopefully they don't repeat as much as I was sitting in that section for. But overall, it was okay to good in areas, so no complaints. Final thoughts. Overall, I would say my experience with Bloodstained Ritual of the Night was more than the sum of its parts. Overall, the thing that disappointed me the most was the gameplay. It felt a little stiff, like I said, and I expected a little bit more fluidity, a little bit more fast-paced movement, regular motion, fluid motion, etc. Everything else was good. I'm intrigued enough to want to check out whether the Steam release or the PS4 release corrects any of these issues. Maybe they could fix some of it in an update. However, I doubt they could fix all the minor issues I had with it. So overall, that's what I would suggest to anyone who's interested in the game. Take a look at comparison shots, as I said before. Take a look at PS4 gameplay, PC gameplay, if you have those systems. If you don't have those systems and you're still interested in the game after listening to this, watching this, I would recommend giving it a shot. Maybe wait for a sale because it does have some issues. But if you're comfortable with those issues, if you're really a diehard Castlevania fan, Metroidvania fan, there's something here. Like I said, I'm intrigued. And I'm not traditionally one of those players. So overall, give it a look if you think that it looks interesting. Otherwise, we'll see you back here for some other discussion, some other gameplay, etc. Thanks for hanging out with me.